I've always wondered how different papers handle different art supplies. Things like, does the colour bleed through? Does the paper warp? Does the paper get chewed up? So today I'm going to do a little experiment to see how papers in art prompt books, colouring books and specific papers handle the most popular art materials. I'm going to test the bleed through, water handling, line precision, flaking and overall look. I'm going to start with the art prompt books. I've chosen 365 Days of Art, Create This Book and 642 Things to Draw for the first test. This is a slightly weird angle. It was a bit hard to fit everything in. In each of these prompt books, I've chosen a prompt to fill with the different art supplies, a puzzle, strokes and polka dots. Going to start with the acrylic paint. This one is by Art Echo. I've got 15 different supplies to use and I'm just going to fill in each area with each one. Next is watercolour. This set is by Mozart. I'm trying to use supplies that are most likely to be used in these books and using the same colour so we can see how different purple is with each one. Next is Gouache by Royal and Langnickel. I didn't have purple, so we've got mauve with this one. This is the last of the paint and we'll move on to colour pencils next. Using Prismacolor and sharpening the pencil for each page. I'm pressing quite hard as this is how I would usually use them. Next is alcohol markers. This one is by Spectra. I've put some paper behind these pages so if we do have bleed through we can see how badly it marks the page behind. We've got a water-based marker next. This one is by Graphics. And a water-soluble pastel. This one is a Caran d'Ache Neo Colour 2. I'm going to test both wet and dry. I'm going to test acrylic paint markers and use an Posca for this. I did have a little accident on Create This Book page. Too much paint came out the pen, so I added a couple of other dots to see the true result. And lastly, I've got this watercolour pencil by Arteza, which I will wet. There's a little space to test some fine liners and a Sharpie. Okay, let's see how these all performed. I wanted to mention about the colours. The acrylic was just labelled purple, the gouache was mauve, and the watercolour pencil was plum purple. The Sharpie and watercolour based marker didn't have a colour named, and everything else was labelled violet, so this is why all the shades are a bit different. I've made a little spreadsheet to document everything. So starting with 365 days of art, did any of these bleed through? So we did have a lot of bleed through with the alcohol markers and the Sharpie. I don't think that's really a surprise. The Sharpie was slightly worse as it's gone through onto the sheet of paper. There's a little bit from the water-based marker as well. I think everything else was okay and hasn't bled through. The water handling, we can see the reverse page has a little bit of warping from the watercolour pencils, the acrylic paint and the watercolour paint. I'm going to put them as amber though, as it's not majorly bad. Line precision, I'm looking for edge sharpness and bleeding. I think there was a little bit of bleeding with the water-based marker and with the Pigma Micron. The Sharpie has the worst lines, but they're not too bad, so amber for those. The paper has held up quite well and only the Posca has pulled the paper away. I find this with this book and it can be a bit annoying trying to get a nice finish. And finally the finish. This is probably a more personal preference, but I don't like the dry neo colour finish. It's a bit lumpy, but the others I think are okay. On to create this book. We've got a serious amount of bleed through on this one. Most noticeable are the alcohol and water-based markers and the Sharpie, but we can also see the watercolour, Neocolour, wet, Poscas and watercolour pencil. Even though I had the leak with the Posca, I think it would still go through. The two liner pens that haven't come through the page at all are the Unipin and Tombow brush. The Pigma Micron is minor and Staedtler pigment liner is the worst. For water handling, the page has warped a little bit, but it's not able to handle any wet media really because it just soaks through the paper. I think the gouache could also seep through if you used it too much, but not as bad as the others. I think with the line precision, it's all okay apart from the Sharpie, and I can't see any flaking. Finish wise, the Neocolour wet and the Neocolour pencil haven't blended very well with the water. Okay, on to 642 days of drawing. The bleed through was bad for the alcohol markers, water-based marker and Sharpie. I think using watercolour would be a bit risky and the Poscas could be too. The Staedtler pigment liner might come through if it was used a lot. We do have some warping mainly with the watercolour and acrylic and a little bit with the Neocolour wet and Posca. Line precision, just the Sharpie again and the alcohol marker. There was a bit of flaking with the water-based marker but nothing else. And look-wise, the Posca was a bit streaky compared to the other books. And I don't think the wet Neocolour worked very well. Moving on to the colouring books, I'm going to test this art therapy book. I think there's loads of different books like this around. Imagine Morphia and another popular book at the moment, Little Corner. With art therapy and Little Corner, the reverse of the pages are blank, so bleed through isn't much of a problem as long as it's not going to go on the next page. Imagine Morphia is double-sided, like the art prompt books, so you have to be a bit more careful with what is used. I'm going to use the same art supplies, just in a different colour. They're mostly true blue or cobalt blue, but they still vary quite a lot in colour. The only material that's different is the watercolour pencil. I didn't have an Arteza one in blue, so I'm using a Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer instead. Okay, so how did these colouring books do? Starting with Little Corner by Coco Wyo. We have Bleed Through with the water-based and alcohol-based markers, the Sharpie and the Neocolour 2 wet as well. There's a little bit with the gouache and watercolour pencil. Fine liner wise, the Staedtler pigment liner has gone through, and there are little bits from all the other liners as well. So if they were used for too long, they could definitely bleed. Water handling, just the watercolour gouache and watercolour pencil have walked the page. Surprisingly, the acrylic paint has laid on quite nicely. I can't see anything wrong with the line precision. The Posca and water-based marker have chewed the page up a little bit. And overall look, I don't think the Posca and water-based marker work well because of the paper lifting. It's even changed colour slightly on the weight there. The watercolour pencil doesn't look right, or the wet Neocolour 2. I wanted to mention that when this was recorded, it was quite warm, about 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, so it's probably had an impact on the results as the wet media dried quickly. I didn't use a large amount of water in the wet media either, so if you use more than I did, you might find that the pages leak. Imagimorphia by Kirby Rosannes. The paper is thicker than the Little Corner and only the alcohol marker and Sharpie have bled through. I can see a very small bit of water-based marker, so I'll put that as amber, because if you tried to layer it, it might show more. Just the watercolour pencil and watercolour walk the page slightly, and line precision seems okay. Again, there's flaking with the Posca, but nothing else, and overall look, I think everything looks fine on this page. Art therapy book. The Sharpie and alcohol markers were the worst for bleed through, and there's a bit from the water-based marker and wet Neocolour at the bottom. None of the liners appear to have come through, and there's the smallest bit of warping from the paints. Everything is nice and precise, and we do have some flaking again from the Posca. I love how clean that water-based marker looks on this page, and I think everything apart from the Posca pen looks alright. With the art prompt and colouring books, it doesn't mention what the paper is, but it does say in some of them which supplies are suitable to use. I wanted to test art papers too, ones that are meant for mixed media, wet media, and are thicker. I'm expecting these to perform a lot differently to the paper you get in the books we've just looked at. I've got a mixed media 250 GM2, suitable for light washes, pencil and acrylic. Watercolour 300 GSM, cold press paper, suitable for watercolour and gouache. Bristol board 250 GSM paper, suitable for markers and colour pencil. And this sketchbook, which has 140 GM2. I think this is in between sketch paper and mixed media, but I'm not quite sure what the paper is suitable for, so I'm going to test it anyway. I'm using orange. Most of the supplies were labelled orange, but a few of them were a different shade of orange, so I'll point those out. Let's start the music. I'll be a bit quicker this time. Okay, so how did these art papers do? Looking at the mixed media and watercolour paper first, just the alcohol marker and Sharpie bled through both. There's a little bit of a bend to the mixed media paper, but we haven't got any crinkling on the other side, so I think it handled all the water mediums well. Same with the watercolour paper, there's a very minor bend to it, but no warping. Line precision. The mixed media is slightly textured and the Unipin pen struggled to get a clean line, and the Staedtler pigment also had a crinkly line. This is the same on the watercolour paper, but with all the fine liners because that paper is really textured. The Posca paint marker is the only supply that flaked on both papers, and the overall finish, the alcohol markers, they look a bit off on both, and the other markers, they just seem a bit streaky. Okay, and lastly, the Bristol board and sketchbook mystery paper. Alcohol markers have bled through. The watercolour and wet neocolour have slightly warped both papers. The gouache has slightly crinkled the sketchbook as well. Line precision, the Staedtler pigment liner has bled a little bit on the Bristol board. Apart from the Tombow brush pen, they're all a bit unclean on the sketchbook paper. We've even had flaking on the Bristol board with the Posca. Overall look, I'm not too sure about the neocolour wet on the Bristol board, and all the markers look streaky and patchy on the sketchbook paper. I think that gives me a good idea of what I could use on what paper. I noticed that I didn't really test the colouring pencils, so I might need to think of something for those at some point. I wanted to make this video to learn more about how different art materials behave, what could be safe to use on whatever prompt book or colouring book I'm doing, because before now I've just learned as I've gone along. I expect that if I used a different brand of paint I could get different results, particularly with anything water-based. If I used a bit more water I could also have warping or bleed through that I wasn't expecting. If I did this in winter the paint might not dry so quickly and I'll get a different result, but this is what I found out today. Also, a lot of the look column is my personal preference, but you might like the look of some of those. I'll put this table on my website because this is what it looks like on the video, if you wanted to look at it along with the links to everything I used today. Let me know if you found the video helpful. I quite like looking at in-depth things, so if there was anything else you think would be good to test, let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching. This did take a while to put together, so thanks for making it to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.